Welcome to Adweek Together. We've been bringing on Adweek's editorial team and some guests to get a better understanding of how the advertising and marketing worlds are managing during this time. And we invite you to check in on past shows. And welcome today. My name is Doug Zanger. I am the agency's editor based in Portland, Oregon. And thank you for joining us. I see quite a few people joining us from all over the place. We've got Chicago, we've got Montreal. Bonjour à tous. That would be for the French as well in France. Grosse Pointe, Michigan, one of John Cusack's finest films. What is it? Grosse Pointe Blank, I think it was. Yes, it was. It was fantastic. So Istanbul, Bangalore, Argentina, Amsterdam. I said Chicago already. Oh, I'm very excited about that Michael Jordan ESPN 30 for 30. I'm very much looking forward to that. But that's a different show for a different time. Today, we are talking agencies. And as we all know, it's clearly a very challenging time. And we're seeing news come out every day of some changes happening, whether it's in the award schemes, whether it's in structural changes, lots of change happening. And even though there's realism to it, we choose to have some level of optimism. And I am joined today by one of my good friends who is probably one of the biggest optimists that I've known over my career, Maria Scileppi, Head of Learning and Development for Mother. How are you today from Los Angeles?
I am good, Doug. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Let's talk about how it's been going for you. And again, you're in Los Angeles, so walk us through what's happening down there, and then what it's been like within the agency.
Well, so I'm kind of overseeing the well-being of two different offices, New York and LA, for Mother. And we've been working from home. This is week 3, as I think for most agencies. For me personally, it's been 9 to 10 hours of Zoom calls a day. A lot of them one-on-ones. Kind of checking in with people and kind of understanding what their biggest challenges are as we look to design a new way of working while we're in this new normal.
Talk about that here in a moment. But I think our little joke before was, I don't know, I shaved for the first time in a couple of weeks. How have you been getting on just personally?
Well, as I told you, I was like, this was an excuse to put makeup on for the first time in 3 weeks. So thank you. I think the importance of, I feel pretty good. Having the first week was kind of shock and adrenaline. And the second week I started adopting better habits. So kind of like meditation and doing some sort of exercise every day. It's been, I think I'm feeling a lot of what other people are feeling, where it's work and personal life are blending. It's redefining my relationship with my space and time and all that. But for the most part, it's felt very, I've had so much human connection, actually more human connection than perhaps in the real world. I've also socially, like I've been doing some dance parties via Zoom with some like great DJs.
All right, what's your go-to? What you gotta tell us your go-to. You can't just leave that one hanging out there.
I'll have to send you. It's a friend of mine does it every other week, but it's
Okay.
really good. And it's like 2 to 3 hours dancing in the living room.
So this is not like just like TikTok something. This is like legit.
Oh, it's
get your dance
legit.
on.
Like 80 people, 80-person Zoom, multiple DJs.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So it's been interesting to see the different ways, the ingenuity of people as we figure out new ways to connect.
Right. Yeah. I think everyone is starting to get into a rhythm. So highlighting last week, we were doing some stuff over on Agency Spy and realized that I had spinach in my teeth as I was doing Twitter Live. And then one morning, just sort of in a haze, not wearing my glasses, I inadvertently used the dog's toothpaste instead of my own. So, it's the first couple of weeks. I think you're allowed to have a few of those. But it does feel like that everyone is getting back to what this new normal is and what it will be. And we'll talk about this here in a second. But have you ever experienced anything like this? A lot of people are talking about the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. We talked about 9/11. In my experience, I graduated from college in 1991, and that wasn't a great time as well. But have you ever experienced anything quite like this?
No. I mean, there's some similarities to 9/11. I definitely felt that deeper than the '08 recession because I was in a transition already during '08. But for 9/11, I was laid off 4 days before September 11th actually happened. So I have a lot of empathy right now for people that are dealing with a trauma and then also not having the kind of financial support and financial stability while dealing with kind of this mass trauma. This is so different though. The flavor of it is completely different. Whereas like 9/11 was very specific. It was a moment in time. It was a specific place. It was very visual. There was a clear enemy. This is nebulous. You can't see it. It's affecting everyone. It's borderless. It's creating a lot of what people are calling kind of this anticipatory anxiety. Like when is it? It's coming. It's not going to be a finite moment. The benefit of this type of trauma is that it could be the thing that brings us all together, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're all, and we're already seeing that, where businesses who would never think to collaborate are coming together and collaborating, and so there's some beauty in this kind of version of trauma that we're experiencing.
In the agency community right now, there is this idea of sink or swim, and that's just the reality. Disruption, a word that we've loved to use on conference stages for a number of years, myself included. This is the new normal. Now, that said, where do you see some silver linings? Because obviously there's a great deal of upheaval, but where are the green shoots of opportunity? That sounded kind of corporate. I said green shoots. But where do you see the opportunity and the silver lining in all of this?
I think before joining Mother, I spent the last 2 years in the tech industry. I was really curious, actually, coming back into advertising, the creative industry, what, if anything, had changed? Because the tech industry in the last couple of years have really been changing a lot of the ways that they've been working. And I was surprised to see that not much had changed. So I think the silver lining, in general in marketing, I think there's just a lot of like legacy behaviors. I think the silver lining here is recognizing that this is a blank slate and we are forced to work in a new way. Like it's not even an option. So it'll be interesting to see how we emerge after this and how agencies evolve. I personally think failure would be going back to the old way of working and not evolving from this.
Specifically, what do you mean? Where are the opportunities? And again, we talk about the old way of working, but what are some specifics that you think that are bad habits that agencies can, because of the situation, wiggle their way out of?
Right. I think, a lot of the kind of tech industries or even newer companies that have, newer companies are more human centric. They have intentionally designed the way they work as opposed to kind of defaulting. And, I think you see it in kind of a lack of real values. I think not thinking about, if creativity is what our business is all about, how are we regenerating that resource? Not just depleting it. And I think there's some, practices. I don't know if that's really thought about. There's high burnout in this industry for a reason. And I think that there are ways that we can be smarter about how we work, where we're regenerating creative energy.
I'll ask you about best practices here in a moment. Moving on to the next topic. But before we do that, you've been getting mad props for the Post-it wall. So if you could give us a quick 30-second.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Well, so I started Mother 3 weeks before the pandemic. So good timing. And actually, I do really think it's good timing. But so part of what I was doing before the pandemic was in kind of a discovery phase and talking to all sorts of people in both offices, all levels, and departments to get a sense for, to get to know them and the company through its people, but also to understand what they're looking for in terms of their personal and professional growth. So I'm mapping the agency essentially.
Let's talk about anxiety, because that was the next issue that you had brought up to me. It was important to talk about, and lots of emotions right now. And we've talked about this among colleagues and friends, where there's a certain level of adrenaline that hits when there's such upheaval, and then you're running on that adrenaline, and then inevitably there is that crash. There could be the 5 stages of grief involved in that, but underlying a lot of it is anxiety. Talk a bit about that and why this is absolutely okay.
This has been a really interesting time in that, and unlike any other time, in that we are all experiencing this at the same time. It's never been safer to be vulnerable and to be really human at work and then just in life. Obviously with this trauma, we all are reacting in different ways. And as I've been having tons of conversations with all different people, there was one in particular that really resonated with me. And it was an employee who was struggling with being creative in this time and is in fact even triggered by kind of all the cultural, headlines and conversations around it. There's going to be a creativity surge and kind of all like how great this is for creativity, which has made her feel even worse. And so we've been having this dialogue about this, and it's been so eye-opening for me. Just to the conversation helped me catch my assumptions I was making, And to also, it's important to kind of honor the spectrum of emotion. Grief is nonlinear, and you know, we are all going with this in different ways. So in having these conversations, it's made me be extra sensitive to like step out of my own mindset, because you're right. Like in the beginning, how you said, I'm a little bit of an insufferable optimist. I'll admit it, but I'm like aware of, I know there's a shadow side. Um, so just being extra sensitive, it's made me feel more comfortable talking about mental health. I think everybody, and just kind of, I think now that it's the conversation feels more, it's a safer time to talk about mental health. That going forward, this will be something that will have a place in the work environment in some way. You know, I think it's really helping kind of open the door even wider for the conversations around mental health.
And I think, the anxiety and fear, and this goes down to the individual level because we're starting to see it right now. And it's devastating to see that there are furloughs, there's layoffs, there are pay cuts, and the reality of this. Yet, again, looking at the optimism, one place, their agencies are still hiring, I guess is my point. And yes, I know it's going to be incredibly competitive, but it's nice to be able to get a level of optimism in this. So, for example, we still have jobs on our job board at Adweek. The One Club just launched a new job board where I believe it's probably close to 180 positions are available, and it varies from market to market. Some are remote, but what would you tell, with your experience with your colleague at Mother, what's one or two pieces of advice that you would give to somebody that gives them a sense of, it's tough right now, but we might be okay, and here's some opportunities for you at this given moment?
Um, I think one, just being there and being supportive, and knowing, I've noticed just in talking to people need an extra, um, I need to feel extra support. So just even having people feel that makes a difference, I think. The this anticipatory anxiety is all about, kind of not being able to predict what's going to happen in the future. The optimistic side of that, if we're unable to predict the future, it means that we can imagine an ideal future, right? So what does that look like? That could be an exercise. If we don't know what to expect, what do we want? What do we want to have? What do we want to show up to? What do we want to create? So I think it's that, and I think also just being okay with feeling it and not trying to necessarily not feel it. You
Right,
know,
right.
acknowledging the emotion and not trying to talk someone out of it.
Let's talk a bit about adaptability and the long view, the long term here. Um, we're in an era of accelerated change. Talk about some of the systems that you've been building internally that are pointing things into a direction where it's about long-term thinking, about generative change, and where you're headed with all of that.
So, part of the work I'm doing at Mother before all this, and it's even more relevant now, is shifting the culture to be more of a learning culture. All of this pandemic is going to accelerate change. Um, and so it's really kind of designing for the human spirit, and really thinking about, which is something, designing for well-being and productivity, but well-being first and foremost. So really our core strategy hasn't changed. How it shows up in this type of environment is a little bit different. Communication is always going to be important when you're distributed, and you don't have the extra inputs of being in a physical space together. It's even more important. You have to like over index on communication. I think the big one though is building in feedback loops. Companies are going to compete on the rate of learning, and not just machine learning but human learning. And so having tight feedback loops is the key to adaptability. And so how do you put that in place? What might that look like? The kind of formal and informal feedback loops. I think also having this like experimental mindset. It's like, we know we need to have a new design. We're forced to blank slate, right? We are forming new habits, whether we realize it or not. So it's like, do you want to be intentional about the way you're working, or are you in default mode? If you haven't deliberately designed the way you're working, then you're in default mode. And that may or may not be a good habit. And habits start forming after 21 days. We're in week 3. So it's really important that companies are implementing things like as soon as possible. And then having that feedback loop. And so just having this iterative mindset where it's like, let's try something. Let's understand what our people need. Let's design something that addresses that need. Let's implement it, and then get feedback as soon as possible and tweak it and do it all over again. And so just this kind of experimental or iterative mindset is key.
Mm-hmm. Agencies will operate a certain way. Again, the forced change is obvious.
Mm-hmm.
What in your mind would be some immediate best practices? What are some systems that agencies of any stripe, whether it's a 3-person shop in Kansas City or a huge holding company, what are some systems that you believe agencies can start enacting right now? And what I mean by that is around structure, around transparency, and around flat out camaraderie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that is the core. And from previous, it's different now. There's lots of resources online about how to work from home and distributed teams and all that. That's very helpful. And we also have to acknowledge we're in a completely different context than we were 3 weeks ago. We are in like a state of heightened anxiety and uncertainty about the future. So it's not just about working from home. And we need to remember that, the kind of mental state that everyone's at. So I think knowing those core principles, that you just mentioned, kind of structure, transparency, camaraderie. There's some things that you can enact, like, every employee should, what are the anchors? What are the things that are going to ground people? One of the biggest things that in all of my kind of conversations with people, I would ask them, what's been the biggest challenge for you? And the biggest challenge for the most part has been a lack of structure and, feeling social connection. So how do we build those systems in place? So again, I think it's just being very close to your people and understanding what they need. Companies are going to need to step up and give more or provide more to employees than they have been asked to in the past,
Mm-hmm.
because now it's like, just given the emotional state and the context that we're in. And so how do you create opportunities for social connection? How do you honor where people are at and let them know it's okay? What are some anchors? How do you build transparency and communication into like everyone's daily? So kind of thinking about what is a person's day, the structure, and then what about weekly, so like different cadences, and what are the rules and the structures in place that will honestly utilize this time. There's some benefits to being at home. You can do some deep thinking, so how do we leverage these new constraints?
Mm-hmm. This is great. Well, Maria, we're gonna wrap it up right now. We probably could talk for hours. And I did see you admiring my slow cooker cook back here, by the way. Speaking of,
I was gonna ask if I could borrow it.
As a native Minnesotan, we love ourselves a little slow cooker and a little hot dish.
Yeah.
The Minnesotans will understand what that is. But in all seriousness, thank you for the time. I look forward to seeing you in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And when all this starts calming down, looking forward to getting back down to LA and giving everybody a huge hug. But appreciate you taking the time. And tomorrow, creativity and innovation editor David Greiner will join us. He'll have a top creative. We're still working on who that will be, but it's going to be somebody great, one of the leaders of our industry. And David and guest will be talking about how the quarantine has changed the creative process. Maria, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Cool. Thank you.
And we appreciate you all taking the time today. And we'll see you tomorrow. Until then, be kind and give love. We'll see you tomorrow on Adweek Together.